Hello, and you're very welcome to the Zebra Mom Podcast with me, Evie Nevin. In today's episode, we have our first guest. She's an exceptional activist, a member of Galway Youth for Choice, who were instrumental during the campaign to repeal the 8th, a Galway Pride member, a fellow Stop Dem, and lately she's been campaigning for the We Can Be Zero campaign to get Ireland out of this blasted pandemic. Please welcome fellow Spoonie and neurodivergent queen, Susan McGrady. You're very welcome, Susan. Thanks very much for coming on. I'm delighted to have you as my first guest.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm very honoured to be your first guest.
So, Susan, I'll jump straight in. At the end of the last episode, I happened to mention that you were diagnosed with ADHD at age 40. Can you tell us, for those who don't know, what exactly is ADHD?
Well, so ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There's a stereotype that people will recognise of ADHD of a hyperactive little boy who can't focus, that sort of, needs to be medicated to exist and to tone down. And that's not really what ADHD is. It is that, but it's a lot of other things as well. So aspects that I really have of ADHD that are strongest in me would be inclination to daydreaming, inclination to get very distracted very easily, very talkative and not really have a filter in terms of knowing what's appropriate to say and what's more often not appropriate to say. So one of the really strong factors for me is a thing called hyperfocus, where when I get interested and engaged in something, everything else falls away, nothing else exists. And with that comes time blindness. I have no awareness of time at all. I need assistive devices to help me kind of keep track of time and reminders, because I'll get so absorbed in a task or a project and it will become my whole world for months. Sometimes that just becomes all I'm doing, and everything else falls away. So that can be really quite debilitating. There's also an absence of executive functioning. For me, I can do absolutely anything for anyone except myself.
So just listening to you there, there's an awful lot I relate to as somebody with autism. It kind of seems like a lot of neurodivergent conditions, or rather neurodiverse conditions, that there is a lot of crossover. And I find that really interesting.
Totally. But can I just also say, that's something that I've come across quite a bit in my adventure in finding out I had ADHD is sometimes people will say, well, we all have that. But I think when you're neurodivergent, it's that you have it to the point that impacts how you function. It can be damaging to how you function in this society as it is. So yeah, everybody has a bit of time blindness, and yeah, everybody can hyperfocus, but to have it to the degree that people with ADHD or with autism have it, it's a whole other ballgame.
You just brought up an interesting point there, actually. What do you think of when people say things like, oh, I think everyone's a little bit autistic, or I think everybody is a little bit ADHD? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a frustrating thing to hear, because I think there's the lack of understanding of how impactful it is on your life. And how difficult your life can be because of it, but also how wonderful your life can be, because I'm very ADHD positive. I realize I have those strengths that come with it, but it's quite dismissive of people. But then you also, from the time that I was diagnosed and learning that women particularly are underdiagnosed with ADHD because we generally present different to the stereotypical hyperactive little boy. Often, sometimes someone will say that and I'll kind of go, yeah, you're more than a little bit. I just don't know it yet.
So you were just talking there about, you were waiting so long to get a diagnosis. You were diagnosed at 40. Am I right in saying that? Yeah.
I would be able to answer that more accurately if I could remember what age I am now. 2.5 years ago, right. I was diagnosed, which tracks with, 40, maybe 41, maybe 39, not entirely sure.
How did you end up being diagnosed then with ADHD?
It was a long and complicated road. Well, in the end, the diagnosis is quite simple, but I don't have a proper medical psychiatric diagnosis that would enable me to have medication. I have a diagnosis from an educational psychologist. That educational psychologist doesn't actually generally do adult diagnosis because, newsflash, nobody does adult diagnosis in this country. It's almost impossible. It is impossible to get a public diagnosis as an adult, and it's extraordinarily expensive to get an adult diagnosis privately, and involves going to Dublin and things like that. So how it came about for me was, I guess, all of my life I've been different. All of my school reports would have the same things, she's amazing one day and totally gone the next day, very inconsistent in my ability to work, always looking out the window, always in a daydream, the most amazing imagination, and creativity wise, not artistic but creative. So how it came about was a family member of mine was diagnosed through, had to go privately as well, because it was through education. Their teacher had said this person needs to have an assessment, but the school didn't have the allocation for another assessment because we're so under-resourced in terms of that. So that person went for their assessment, and obviously I'm maintaining their privacy. So that person went for an assessment and was diagnosed with ADHD. And as I, in trying to be supportive to my family member, learned more and more, I realized this is ticking an awful lot of familiar boxes. Did a couple of those online ADHD tests, which all came back saying, dude, it's not even a question. And eventually got in touch with the person who had done my family member's educational psychological test. And he very kindly agreed to look at my case, and eventually came back with, yes, you definitely fit the criteria for ADHD. So that involved because he was a child psychologist, that involved me having to get, so normally he would get information from a parent and a teacher.
Yeah.
I didn't have a parent and a teacher to go to, so I went with my ex-husband and my former business partner at the time. So that was how they pieced it together. And I gave him, all of the stuff from my educational, that background of what teachers did say about me when I was younger and what colleagues and people I work with say about me now. So I could go and pay the nearly €1,000 to get diagnosed privately by a actual psychiatrist, but the only reason for me to need to do that would be if I wanted medication. Fellow Spoonie, I'm already on a million medications, and I feel that at the age of 40 I've learned enough coping mechanisms that I kind of function. I mean, I totally don't. There's a pile of paperwork right beside me here that shows I do not function, but I feel like I function, so I'm okay.
So, getting that diagnosis so late in life, how did that make you feel? Like, I know for me, being diagnosed with autism at 33, it was kind of bittersweet, because in one sense it did wonders for my mental health, because I kind of finally knew what was going on with me. I wouldn't say what's wrong with me, what's going on with me. But then I was also kind of sad for looking at little Evie, who, always felt quite weird and was always quite frustrated and always felt out of the loop with her friends, and I just felt weird.
100%. I mean, for me, getting the diagnosis, it was a confirmation of something I already knew, because I knew by the time my family member had been diagnosed and I had looked into it, I was like, this isn't a question. And when I told friends that I had the diagnosis, they were like, this is really no surprise. But it was a fantastic thing in terms of me now having tools to understand why I've always been different and why I've always been somewhat of a misfit. Pink hair aside, but why I've not ever really fit in properly in a lot of circles. I suppose the struggles that I had in terms of my education, I decided very early that I wasn't going to continue on to university. And, there are supports in the world that could have enabled me to continue with my education. I just didn't know that they were there. I didn't understand why I wasn't able to achieve academically. I'm not completely ignorant of the way the world works and how life is. And, I get things pretty quickly. I'm reasonably smart, but I just couldn't ever study. I couldn't knuckle down and focus. Like if you put a book in front of me and asked me to read the first 10 pages, I'll have to read even the first paragraph 5 times, because if it's not engaging me immediately, I'm gone. Reading for me is not something that it requires a lot of extra focus. Whereas if you give me a screen, or if you give me an audible, or that I can be doing something else physically, I can engage and I can take that in. But I didn't understand that when I was younger. So school was really, really hard. The aspect of, speaking out of turn was a huge problem, still is for me. I've tried to rein it in, but it's not easy. And also saying the thing that pops into my head without filtering it through, is that really something you should say? Happens way too often still, and that's even though I'm aware of it. So if I'm aware of it now at 40, I can only imagine what I was like when I was younger and I wasn't aware of it and I didn't understand it. And then on top of that, I think there's a piece around, people who are neurodivergent communicate differently. Like what I think I'm saying to you, you're taking in as what you think I'm saying to you. And there's this it's a total mismatch. And when you don't understand that the person you're trying to communicates totally different to you, it's really hard to communicate together. And it's the same vice versa. If you say something to me, I may not understand it as you mean it.
You interpret it differently.
Exactly. That obviously is going to cause problems. The other thing popped into my head, and then I went on a tangent because by the age of 12, a child with ADHD will have had 20,000 more negative comments than their neurotypical friends. And so if a child of 12 has had 20,000 more negative comments, I can't even do the math on what it would be by the age of 40. But on top of that constant negative feedback that you do get, that can be really subtle, but also incredibly damaging. And that, turns you into someone who has a lot of barriers or trust issues or takes criticism badly or any of those things. So yeah, I do. I look at little Susan and I think, but what can you do? It is how it is. So,
and you brought up something interesting there about the education system, particularly I think here in Ireland, it's very much a one size fits all. It's kind of like asking fish to fly, and I think hopefully in the coming years, and particularly now that we're in a pandemic and education is kind of changing because of it, especially in terms of things like online learning, which was not kind of amazingly accessible before. So hopefully, I think in the future that there may be some sort of change. And I think there definitely does need to be a change, because we need education to be accessible for everybody and to create a society where it's fair and equal. And it's not a case of asking for special treatment. We're asking for a level playing field to allow us to succeed like everybody else. And it would be great to live in a world where being neurodivergent is kind of seen as just as normal as, anybody else, and that it's understood, I think, a little bit more. I think everybody's kind of aware of the terms ADHD and autism and things like that, but at the very core don't really understand the day-to-day struggles of people who are neurodivergent.
I think the education thing, if I can go back to that,
please.
I think that the education thing, even though I wasn't aware that I had ADHD, informed how I became an activist, because I grew up, we traveled a lot when I was young. I spent a lot of my formative years in the US, in a multi-denominational, co-educational, no uniform type of school that felt far more child-focused than, or student-focused than when I came back to Ireland at the age of 13 and went into a all-girls convent uniform, not child-centered environment. And I didn't have a very happy educational experience when I came back here, until I eventually went for my Leaving Cert year, just purely to pass the Leaving Cert. I've been very sick for fifth year. And to pass the Leaving Cert, I went to a fee-paying Leaving Cert school for that year, so I could pass it and get out of academics. And that was a game changer for me when I realized that, you know, here I was in an environment where I was being treated like an adult. I was being asked, what did I need? What support did I need? You know, how could they help me? How could they support me? Rather than just being, you know, you learn what the teacher tells you sort of environment. So when I had my own kids, aside from there being a religious aspect, I'm not Catholic, so I had a thing about them not going to a Catholic school. But also when I heard of Educate Together and I heard of how child-centered they try to be, and like that's one of the main focuses, is teaching to the child and teaching them how they will learn rather than how you teach, if you know what I mean. So like it's 15 years since I started my activism in terms of getting involved in setting up Educate Together schools in Galway. That was a huge factor. I didn't realize why I felt so strongly about how our education system had failed me, but I knew I didn't want my kids to go through the same experience.
Yeah, when it comes to the education system, I'm not sure exactly what the experience of students is now, because I've been out of education for a long time. But like I went to an all-girls Catholic school for primary school, and like if you were anyway a little bit different, you were often berated by teachers. And the system then at least was, and kind of a little bit like now, but in a way, but the system very much back then was about moulding the child to fit societal standards and to fit educational standards and behavioural standards set by people who didn't have much understanding of, you know, neurodiversity or anything like that, or children with additional needs or anything like that. So it was a very, very hard time, particularly when things like SNAs weren't kind of common. Definitely when I was going to school anyway, it was not something kind of that was commonplace, or understanding of children who were neurodiverse. And as you said, the education system as it stands, apart from being kind of schools like Educate Together, and there's a lot of really good schools that kind of follow a similar ethos, but for the most part, it is about moulding the child to fit a certain, or to put them in a certain box and to mould them in a certain way, according to what society demands of its people. So you were talking about your activism, and I remember not that long ago you said that ADHD was a superpower to you, and while we understand that it can be very debilitating and that you have very bad days, I know yourself that you described it as a superpower because there are certain benefits that you find from it. Could you explain that a little bit for us?
When I go into hyper-focus on something, I am unlimited in energy. I do not need to sleep. I am 100% focused, to the detriment of other things. In terms of getting shit done, nobody can beat me when I'm in hyper fixation mode. I mean, and with that, there's also the creative streak that I guess, as I said, I'm not artistic. I don't have like an artiness to me, but I am very creative. So I'll come up with creative solutions. So for example, in repeal, I was 175% submerged in repeal for the whole thing, and coming up with different ways to get our message across. And I'm sure you'll remember that funding was not high at the time. It was hard in rural areas, or, down in Galway City, in Galway East. We had to find very creative ways to get the message out. And I remember somebody saying, we don't have any banners for the table. We don't, we've nothing to advertise. And I was like, I'll make some. And being asked, like, do you know how to make banners? I was like, no, but we'll figure that out. And, like half a week later, I had churned out 4 Galway Together for Yes banners, a Connemara banner and a TFMR banner, just by learning how to do them with my mother's sheets.
You also suffer from chronic pain. Does that affect your ADHD or vice versa?
So going back, when I was 30, I put my back out. Simple as that. Bent over, something cracked, the disc basically bulged. And for the following 9 years, I didn't really recover. So I was on and off. I would have periods of weeks where I was okay. And then I would have sort of periods of 3 weeks where I was essentially off my face in bed on tramadol and Valium and anti-inflammatories and all of that stuff. And it was a very big blur. I was very severely and significantly incapacitated. I had my former husband was amazing. My mum was amazing. We had great family supports and things. But in terms of the isolation that I experienced through that time of not being able to move, and without being too graphic, I remember there being times where it would take 45 minutes with the assistance of my husband at the time to get from my bed to the shower so I could pee. It was really, really bad. And that space of being stuck in bed on my own all the time, aside from the social isolation, which I guess everyone's getting a picture of now, hi, welcome to our world, my brain was numbed by the medication. So that may have taken some of the edge off. But that was where I learned social media campaigning. That was at that time we were working on the campaign for Second Level Educate Together in Galway. At least I had somewhere to focus. At some points I had places to focus that energy. I also suffered massively in terms of my mental health. I remember my GP insisting that I go for counselling for 2 reasons. One, the fact that the medication she was putting me on was particularly strong and had side effects that were worrying, but also the fact that I was just in the worst space in terms of having this energy, having nowhere to put it, and being completely isolated at home all the time. 4 years ago, I had a double spinal fusion. So they put a scaffolding into my spine that prevents me from squishing those particular discs that were damaged, which is fantastic. I only suffer from a little bit of back pain now, but unfortunately, like, it had been 9 years by the time I had surgery, and I seem to have damaged the nerves that transmit to my right leg. So my right leg from my knee to my foot is completely numb at the front. And then my right thigh is amazing mixture of sensations, and you never know what you're going to get. So it can be lightning, it can be pain, it can be the one I hate most is the twitching. The muscle fibers will just twitch all on their own, and that would drive you completely bananas when you're trying to go to sleep. So I manage all of these things by a mixture of medications that I'm on, which, as I said earlier, is kind of why I don't want to go on anymore in terms of ADHD meds. And I manage well enough. And some days are okay, and some days are not okay. So that's how chronic pain affects me. Funnily enough, like, I'll fight through it. I will go and stand on Shop Street with my cane if I need to for 8 hours and be in agony all night and be in absolute bits, but I'll still, but there's always, as you know, a cost. Sometimes it's not immediate, sometimes it's a little further down the line. But
yeah, the cost
the cost of doing, like, we had this conversation on Twitter the other day, where it's like, oh, I think I'll do something today, and then your body's like, you're so funny. Look at you trying to organize stuff and being, going out like, a in quotes normal person. But yeah, and then like you have a great day out, let's say, and then you're suffering for the week after, and then people are like, but you did this the other day, why can't you do it today? And it's like, and then having to explain spoon theory to people about how, you only have a certain amount of energy and you have to spend it wisely. And that can be, I know that you feel frustrated by that as well, where people don't understand the cost of doing anything, even something as simple as going for a shower. I mean, for me, that takes a massive amount of energy, and it takes me usually I have to go lie down after, if I want to do anything else for the rest of the day.
And I mean, that's me with this will have a cost. Sitting, so I'm not great with a seated position. Driving long distances or sitting are the worst things I can do. So this will have a cost. I will lie flat for about 45 minutes after this to get myself back to normal. If I go for a walk, which of course I want to do because I want to try and be fit and be healthy, because I mean, who doesn't? But that will come with the cost. I will, if I make the mistake of, if I walk where I live here in the village, it's quite flat and it's a reasonable place to walk, except for all of those people parking on the footpath. But if I go down to, say, the local park, there's a lot more hills, or the back road, a lot more potholes. And just that, the difference in it being a level flat surface or it being slightly, the payoff in pain for walking on that back road is so much more. And you try to manage as much as you can. I mean, when you've been on medication for 14 years now on medication for chronic conditions, and yourself by that stage how to manage, okay, today I need to take a little bit more of this, or today I need to definitely, we'll pretend to be saying Panadol, but I mean, really, it's, today I will take some tramadol to deal with my pain. I'll also be a little bit less alert. And so that's another payoff. And then there's the payoff of the medication that you have to take to protect your stomach, because you've been taking medication for so long that your stomach is in bits. And the knock-on effects, the way it impacts every aspect of your life, is completely unfair. And I'm writing a letter to the management.
Everything you've said there, I completely relate to. It is so frustrating when people don't understand what it's like.
Or the other one, Evie, and I know you'll get this as well, is, say, you have, if I am using my cane, which I do something, I mean, I fall over way too much.
You do. You really do.
To the point that I actually specifically on my watch have a thing that if I fall over, will ask me if I'm okay, and will send a message to people to let them know I've fallen over. So I'm a faller. And it's partly because of my leg, and it's also partly because I've really crap proprioception. Like, I'm very bad at being aware of, what's around me and stuff. I'm off in daydream land, and I take a misstep and my leg isn't able for it, and plonk. So the point of that being that sometimes then, if I'm using the cane, or if I'm not using the cane, and this sort of question of, hang on, I thought you use a cane, or hang on, why do you need the cane, or what happened to you? And I'm like, nothing happened to me. This is, I just need this. Sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I really badly do. And that people don't understand that, like, there can be days where I don't need to use anything to help me with mobility, But there are also days where I'm literally not going to get through the day or get through the walk if I don't have something. And there can feel like a judgy thing. There can feel like oh, she's using it for attention today, or oh, things like that. And that can, getting myself into the mental headspace, I remember, of starting to use the cane, knowing that I needed really badly at this point. This was before my surgery. I really badly needed to be using a cane. And I must have spent at least 4 hours in counselling just talking about how I felt about using a cane and acknowledging my vulnerability and my disability. Like 4 hours, I'd say. I'm sure she was fed up in the end. I'd say the day I walked in with the cane, she was like, oh, thank God that discussion's over.
I totally relate, because I remember, OTs and stuff saying to me about using a wheelchair, and for ages I was like, I wasn't kind of comfortable with the idea of it, but then when I did, and especially when I got the electric chair, oh my God, electric wheelchair, that sounded when I got the electric wheelchair, oh my God, the independence I got from it, being able just to, whiz away downtown and not having to ask my husband to come with me and things like that. And it was completely life-changing. And then there's days then where I would just use the cane, or I won't use anything at all. And I actually remember during the local elections in 2019 when I ran here in West Cork, and myself and my husband shot my campaign video over a number of weeks. And so in some shots I had my cane, in some shots I was just strolling along the beach with nothing, and then in other shots I had my wheelchair. Mm-hmm. And I remember there was a comment underneath the video going, oh, she's using a cane one day, wheelchair the next, and now and then nothing, and making the accusation that I was faking for to live on disability or something like that. And it's like, dude,
no idea.
You have no idea. And also, living on disability is it's no lap of luxury, like,
absolutely rolling in it here.
Woo. But it's that sort of and I think that's just the thing about invisible conditions in general. And like, there are days where I'm in the supermarket in my wheelchair and I need to go and stand up to get something that I can't reach, and I'm almost like looking around seeing if anybody will see me, and my husband kind of has tried to diffuse that situation a little bit, so when I stand up he'll go, oh, it's a miracle. And kind of do these things to poke fun at me a little, so I can poke fun at myself, I suppose. And even during repeal, people would say, oh yeah, she's only using the wheelchair to get attention, and she's only doing this to get attention. And it's like, that's like, if this is all me faking, this is a long game I've been playing.
Taking a lot of energy out of me.
Yeah, because like I started complaining. Yeah, the pain really kicked off me when I hit puberty, when I was about 14, and I hadn't stopped. So for people to go, oh, she's taking it, it's like, geez, that's a long game I've been playing there, all to what? Get 200 quid a week on disability. Woohoo!
Yeah. It's definitely a frustrating one, and I think it like, I suppose one of the things that people are so damn judgy sometimes, and you kind of just want to say, you know what, you go get on with your life. And don't be worrying about whether or not I have a cane, or don't be worrying now, okay, yes, I have the cane with me and I'm not using it. That's okay too. I remember going to my physiotherapist. I had, because it's lockdown, I haven't seen him, but I have got a very good physiotherapist, and I remember going to see him to get for him to work on my leg. And I went in and he did whatever, and I really enjoy a very deep, thorough massage, probably because my nerves don't feel anything or don't feel what's actually happening. But him saying to me, okay, do you have your cane? And me going, no, I'll be fine. And him going, no, you won't be fine. I'm after drilling a hole in your leg working on it. You're not going to be able to. And I was like, no, I'll be fine. And he said, you're not to go anywhere without the foldy up cane in your bag. And I was like, no, I'll be grand. Left. By the time I got to Ayr Square, I was doing a thing for Pride. By the time I got to Ayr Square, I could barely walk. I was just in absolute agony. And I was like, yeah, this has to be a lesson that even if you do feel self-conscious using devices, that, you know, they're there to help you. That's what they're for. And judging someone because they've acknowledged that they need assistance in one way or another is really not cool.
It's not cool. And don't be judgy.
Be sound, don't be judgy.
Yeah.
It was announced recently that there was a new model of care for adults with ADHD. Can you explain what this is all about?
It's a fairy tale because they don't have the funding for it. So it's a fairy tale. There is currently no care for people with ADHD. There hasn't been. There is ADHD Ireland, who are a supportive sort of charity organisation. When I was diagnosed, I set up a Galway ADHD support group on Facebook, which is where we kind of support each other for people in Galway or people who are parents of children with ADHD. The new model of care, like, first of all, I remember I didn't watch the webinar explaining how it would all work because, well, for two reasons. One reason was we were referred to as people with altered abilities.
Yeah, I was going to say, what do you think of the term altered ability that it's mentioned in this new model of care?
Go away, like. My altered ability has been to be invisible to mental health care and healthcare for the last 40 years of my entire life. So, you know, altered ability, I thought that was really ridiculous. Way to phrase it, slightly offensive, to be honest with you. Like, it's not an altered, it's how our brains are. And it's so many people have brain wiring that is different to other people. Why? It's not altered, like, go away. It was othering. It was othering of us, you know, and that sort of, rather than including and accepting and embracing who we are in our difference and supporting that and, you know, making society an easier place for people like us to exist. Instead of that, it's othering us as being abnormal, I suppose. So altered ability can, you know what it can do.
Get in the sea.
In terms of the actual program, look, if it were to actually get rolled out, and if it were to happen in a timely manner, then that would be great. It would be absolutely brilliant. But it's subject to funding. They don't have funding for it yet. And, you know, I look at, say, for example, Sláinte Care. And, you know, it took an entire cross-party committee who worked really hard together and came up with this really solid plan about how to further develop our health services. And yet it, for the most part, sits on a shelf, not getting done. And, you know, you look at the pandemic and you kind of go, well, wouldn't it have been great if even the beginnings of Sláinte Care had an effective rollout? I looking at how our public health teams are resourced, for example, or should I say how they're not resourced. The complex tracing teams are so under-resourced. Didn't have to be that way. Put a bit of money in it, give them the IT systems, the staff, more training, more knowledge. We could have done so much better in terms of our contact tracing. And so when the government comes out with a, you know, rollout of a great new plan to do whatever, I kind of go, I'll believe it when I see it. We'll continue to do this ourselves and support each other ourselves because we can't trust you to do it for us.
The term altered ability, I was like, why don't they just say what it is and say neurodivergency or I don't know, just like altered ability. It is very kind of, I find it offensive.
It's just like othering. You're different to us. You're altered. Like, that's rude.
It is. It is rude. Absolutely, it is. And then it's not great when we have people in government othering us so publicly as well, and referring to us as not normal. You know, it's like I came across a really good explanation actually about for neurodivergency and neurodiversity. And I ended up buying a t-shirt that said it as well, and it's like different operating systems. There's nothing wrong with my coding, it's nothing wrong with your coding, it's just, you know, some people are Android, some people are Apple. You know, that's kind of the easiest way I think to explain it to some people, that we just run on a different operating system, and it's not necessarily that there's anything wrong or abnormal or altered about it. It's just the way our brains are wired. And you know, it's far more common than people think. Like, for example, like 1 in 68 people are autistic. You know, so it is the norm. You know, it's not rare by any means. Not like, you know, my thing of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, where it's 1 in 5,000, at least 1 in 5,000 people. You know, it's just the language. People have to be like, I don't ever expect people to know things straight away.
No, of course not.
But like, if you're not sure, just ask. Like, we're not going to bite your head off for wanting to know how to be mindful of and not offensive.
So before we sign off, what bit of advice would you have for anybody who is currently undiagnosed with ADHD or somebody who is newly diagnosed with ADHD?
Learn about it. The accessing diagnosis is so very, very difficult in Ireland. And unless you have the money to go privately to that like one person that I'm aware of, you're gonna be fighting a losing battle and being disappointed. So, I mean, learning about ADHD, learning about how the brain works differently, learning about what it is you need to function. And I mean, I start very basically with to function. I know what I need I know tricks to give myself that dopamine boost that will make me actually be able to function for a day. So if I'm stuck sitting on the couch, and even my family know, like my kids and my former husband, that, you know, if I'm just sitting there on the couch staring at the wall, the best thing to do is play some poppy music, because that will start to get me into a better mood. And then I'll get up and then I'll start to dance. And once I start to dance, there's dopamine. There, now I can function. Now I'm not just stuck sitting at the wall. So like little tips and tricks to get yourself started with doing things. And I know we're talking about being in a pandemic. I mean, sitting staring at the wall wasn't something I traditionally did when I wasn't in horrendous pain. But I think learning as much as you can about it and getting onto ADHD Ireland and finding out where the support groups are. So in Galway, we have a Facebook page that's ADHD Galway, I think we called it, or ADHD Support Group Galway. And it's just a space for people to discuss and to talk about it and to learn from other people's experiences. You know, if you've gotten through 40 years of your life without being diagnosed, you've probably developed a lot of tricks, coping mechanisms anyway yourself without realizing that you were doing it. And you will find then that when you start reading about like coping mechanisms and things that are helpful, you already do a lot of them because you had to. It was necessity for survival. There's a debate on to medicate or not to medicate. If that's something that you think that you need, then you do need to go for the full diagnosis through a psychiatrist, because that's how you get prescribed medication. For me, I'm happy enough not to. I mean, I'm not on med. I don't know what difference medication could make. It could make a massive difference to me. But again, I'm on so many other medications, and some of them actually are also prescribed for ADHD, funnily enough. So that's an interesting crossover that I wasn't aware of. I guess, look, what I want more than to give advice to people who are getting their diagnosis is to explain to people who aren't diagnosed, who don't have ADHD, to explain to society and to people who are neurotypical what it is that is making our brains work differently, and why it is we respond differently, and why it is we behave in a different way to them, and to help make society a better, easier place to navigate, whether you're neurodiverse or neurotypical, and to create a society where we're not expected to fit into, where we're not expected to conform, and where we're embraced, you know, whether you are neurotypical or whether you are neurodiverse, that you are embraced and loved for the awesome person you are, even if you are a bit different. It, like, I hate the world. You know, just to make society a more accepting place, and for society to understand that, yes, my brain is not working the same way your brain is, and that's okay. It doesn't need to. My brain is perfectly happy doing its thing, and the only reason it is unhappy doing its thing is because societal norms make me stand out.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm happy with how my brain. Okay, I'm not happy with the pile. The pile of paperwork beside me. That's not great. But everything else, I'm quite happy. So be happy. Be proud of who you are. Look at your strengths. Okay, there are things that absolutely suck in having ADHD. There are things that make life really difficult. But there are also amazing things that make me able to campaign for 9 months, 24 hours a day solidly without taking a break. You know, find the things that you can do and that you do well, and do those and be happy with those. And the things that you don't do well, you know what? Let other people do them.
Yeah. And I mean, and also, you know, nobody is able to do all of the things.
No.
Like, no one is able to do everything. So yeah, that's I think that's well said.
Love who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I take great pride now in my autism. You know, that I'm proud of who I am, and that I'm proud of the things I've had to overcome with it. And like, I know when I got I don't know about you, but when I got the diagnosis, it did wonders for my mental health. It did wonders. Were you the same?
It explained a lot. I was going through a difficult time in my life anyway. When I got my diagnosis, I was going through separation. So in terms of things improving my mental health, we needed something more than a diagnosis of ADHD. But it made a big difference, and it made a big difference within even that relationship separating, and all of my relationships, when I finally understood that I was communicating in a different way to how other people were communicating. And it made a huge difference to the people who are close to me to understand, when they did look and learn and understand what the difference between how my brain works and their brain works, when they went to the effort to learn that, it made a huge difference in how my relationships with people who went to the effort to find out that information, it improved them. So yeah, in terms of my mental health, the diagnosis, I definitely, I wish I'd gone and gotten it sooner, but so what? That's life. I'm glad I know now. I know that they're going through the process of diagnosis. When I actually got the diagnosis confirming, it was a relief. It was like, okay, this now explains so much. And now I can view all of these things that have happened in my life through a different lens and understand them better.
Yeah. It was the same for me too. And I think what I would like people to take away as well from this conversation today is never underestimate the power of a Google search. Because anytime anybody says to me, oh, I Googled Adrian's Danlos, I Googled this, any of my multitude of conditions. It means so much to me that somebody took the time to learn and to understand. You know, and like, for example, you know, April is Autism Month, and some people say autism awareness. It's like people are aware of autism. The people are aware of ADHD. It's acceptance, it's understanding, it's love, and it's support is what we need, you know, more than anything. So yeah, I would totally agree with you there about, you know, just loving yourself and be proud of who you are. And if anyone has an issue with it, then, you know,
hit them with your cane.
Disclaimer: the Zebra Mom does not condone violence.
Disclaimer: neither does Susan McGrady.
Well, look, on that note, Susan, I want to thank you very, very much for coming on the show and for opening up about your own experiences and teaching us an awful lot. I hope people are more educated now about ADHD and maybe have a more positive outlook on it, that it's not this stereotypical hyperactive boy in a classroom kind of situation, that it comes in, it's a kind of a spectrum thing. It affects people differently. No two people with, you know, the same condition have the same needs and things like that. So yeah, it's been really, even for me, it's been very, very enlightening. What are your Twitter handle and things like, where can people find you?
On Twitter, I have to actually look at my phone. On Twitter, I believe I am Susan McGalway. Susan McGalway, yes, so McGalway. I'm just Susan McGrady on Facebook, and I'm either Susan McGalway or Susan McGrady on Instagram. So pretty easy to find.
And with that said, Susan McGrady, thank you so much for being my first guest. That's it for me today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you've learned a lot, and I hope you will join me next time when I have another guest. There is a long list of people who are looking to come on and have a chat with me. So thank you so much for listening, and until next time, take care. Bye, folks.